Hey everyone, this is Cameron from Renegade Animation on renegadepopculture.com. If you like what we do, please give us a like, a follow, and a rating on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to us. We are everywhere. Make sure to share out our episodes, and if you can, consider supporting our Patreon. That way we can keep doing what we love, and that's talking about the wild world of animation. And now, on with the show.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Renegade Animation on the Renegade Pop Culture Podcast Network. My name is Mike. I'll be your host for this evening. Joining me, as always, is the animation guru himself, Cameron,
Howdy, howdy.
and making his return to the animation podcast in like well over a year. We got Tommy back.
Greetings, Captain. It's good to be back, and it's a privilege to be amongst both you and Cameron as we express not only why 2024 continues to be an incredible year for animation, but why today's showcase emphasizes the power of how cinema speaks to us in some way, shape, or form.
This is a big one. We are talking about, it is kind of bittersweet to say this, the last in-house production from DreamWorks Animation, The Wild Robot. But before we get there, Tommy had an idea that he pitched to us about movies that were very influential to the three of us. Now, I took this prompt and kind of ran with it with the theme of animated robots, and there's one in particular that we can all speak quite fondly of, and that's 1999's The Iron Giant.
There's a reason why Cinépolis had that on its Cannes Cinematic Showcase not too long ago, and just that moment alone where he said not following, and he just went up for the final time, just tugs at your heartstrings every single time.
Yeah, that's a one of Brad Bird's classic films that nobody went to see and Warner Brothers screwed over. It's bittersweet how companies will literally self-sabotage themselves because of whatever nonsense. Now, for me, man, I got a lot of films that influenced me as a film fan and an animation fan, and just a fan of animated films. There's obvious picks like Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away. I mean, that scene where Chihiro rides the train is one of the best scenes in any movie released. And then there are the more adventurous films from his earlier days, like Porco Rosso and Castle in the Sky, that really tug at my love for nature, sci-fi, fantasy, drama, romance, and adventure, with stuff like Castle in the Sky being an old school adventure movie and Porco Rosso being an anti-war drama that just so happens to have a man who is a pig. Then some more recent ones, though, include 2019's Children of the Sea, which has probably some of the best animation from the 2010s, like top three easily.
Oh yeah.
The wondrous connection of life in the universe through the ocean produced some of the most jaw-dropping visuals that I just don't think we will ever see again. It's funny, I got a lot of movies that influence me in what I like. Triplets of Belleville with its silent comedy driven story and mind-blowing visual and grade A character design. And then Misaki Iwasa's in there with like The Night is Short, Walk On Girl. Mamoru Hosoda's there with Belle and Wolf Children. There is just so much amazing animation made by super talented teams, artists, animators, writers, directors, editors. It's such a wonderful medium of storytelling that really just should have more recognition than it does, but audience perception is going to be stupid. So,
Yeah, I'm hoping one day we no longer have to look at animation as sitting at the kids' table compared to other styles of film, other genres, other more adult or serious movies where you have people like Chris Sanders who have been in the business since the late 80s and working as an animator throughout like most of the Disney Renaissance, from Beauty and the Beast to even The Rescuers Down Under, Aladdin, The Lion King, which we talked about a few months ago, still to this day one of my all-time favorites. And coming to his own as a director with Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Chris Sanders, man. He is just so cool.
And it's understandable to see how sought inspiration from the classics of Walt Disney Pictures and marrying that with inspiration from respective works of Miyazaki. And when you think of his latest project, The Wild Robot, to achieve a desired showcase resembling the production's concept paintings, reminiscent of a Monet from a Miyazakian forest. And when you think of the classic inspirations that I grew up in a Disney household, and I can pinpoint various moments, especially in the case of my relationship with my mom. And when you look at like something as simple as looking at the collection of VHS tapes that we had in my home growing up, and whether she was taking a nap and my sister and I were watching the original 1941 Pinocchio. And the moment the ending, we would just shout out upstairs, "It's over!" Just as a way to tell her, okay, it's time to get up. The movie, you've had your rest. Now it's time to get back to work as being a parent. And from The Lion King, that Elton John soundtrack. And not only that, but Hans Zimmer's score story in and of itself spoke to us in particular moments. And Toy Story is the same way. And growing up in that Disney household, we were able to showcase, have those mutual feelings. And as new characters are developed from the Pixar standpoint, my love for auto racing is I can still see the day on June 9th in 2006, when I went to Silverado 16 in San Antonio for the first time to see Cars. And now as we look towards today, and the creation of the character Joy. So much of Joy is in my mom, and now to the Wild Robot today. It's something very profound, and sharing that with my mom and the emotional roller coaster and that emotional connection that lives through us and will live with us, continue to live through us forever.
I got to see The Wild Robot early. I was at Fantastic Fest. I went to a Saturday morning screening of it, and this was right after I saw press and industry screening of A Different Man, which such a wild two movies to watch in a day, especially if you know what A Different Man is about.
Mm.
And sitting down, like I was ready. The Wild Robot had probably the most beloved trailer of the year.
Oh my gosh.
That first trailer with like no celebrity quips or anything like that. I mean, yeah, it had the slow down pop song, but who cares? It was amazing. It let the audience know what kind of movie we were getting into. It was special. There were so many comments of people saying this trailer made me cry. And yeah, I cried. I showed it to my parents, and my parents were like, well, that just makes me want to cry. And then we finally get it. Like, I wish the journey of getting the Wild Robot finally, after seeing that first amazing trailer, was clean, fun, and delightful. And it is still worth celebrating all of the amazing and just soulful work that went into this movie. It is bittersweet, the fact that a few months later, DreamWorks was laying off people left and right. They were starting to officially outsource their animation to other non-union studios, which included Sony Pictures Imageworks in Montreal, because they just, for some reason, wanted to save a few bucks instead of just moving out of California. It was frustrating to see so many stories of people saying, well, my last day on the Wild Robot ended, and to know what is going on right now in the animation industry with the entire Hollywood system doing its damnedest to ruin this medium of storytelling, to save a few dollars, to try to replace it with robots that have no idea how to make a heartwarming, earnest piece of cinematic art. It was frustrating to have that constantly in the back of my head that this was the last in-house made DreamWorks animated movie. And I just wish we didn't have to say that. I wish whatever bonuses the animators could have gotten were still going to them because of the, we saw the whole thing with Inside Out 2, which is deeply frustrating on an entirely different level.
Hmm.
And by the way, I don't want to take too much time on this. I need animation fans and animation YouTubers to just shut the hell up with this console war, Nintendo versus Sega in the 90s nonsense between Pixar and DreamWorks and studios in general. The moment Jared Bush, who is the new head of Disney Animation, said congrats to Chris Sanders and his team for the Wild Robots. That should have been the moment everyone's like a light turned on, a switch was hit
Absolutely.
where it's like, oh, this juvenile, immature baloney that we keep artificially making because it brings discussion, discourse, and the algorithm to us doesn't actually exist. We fictionalized a console war between companies that are not even competing against one another.
If anything, as that tweet perfectly represented, like all of these studios are all they're trying to do is, yes, they are businesses and they want to make money, but beyond that, they just want to share the work that they created with the rest of the world.
Absolutely. And this is the business of never say never. It's when computer generated imagery became the first and foremost and the pinnacle of showcasing what animation is all about in mainstream Hollywood filmmaking. We never expected to see hand drawn animation make its return to Walt Disney Pictures, for example. But it did come back. I like to believe that anything is possible, but in the vein of realism, in addition to that, if this really is the final movie to be released in-house from DreamWorks Animation, then they went out on the highest of high notes possible. And to go back to that aforementioned teaser trailer, Cameron, with what you were saying about getting emotional, when I first witnessed this teaser, I was working my day job running orders at Sinopolis Luxury Cinemas. Listening to this trailer hit close to home. The lyrics wasn't just a pop song. These were lyrics to an adapted cover of, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. These were lyrics to an adapted cover of a song that would cause me to emotionally break down every time I ran delivered orders. I see trees of green and clouds of white, the bright, blessed day, the dark, sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. These were the lyrics to my grandma's favorite song, What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. And that line in the trailer where they showcased the central theme, which was sometimes to survive, we must become more than what we're programmed to be. We didn't know what the movie was about at that point, whether, I mean, those who read the book might have, but it's the type of movie that, regardless of how the final product turns out, it built up anticipation. Something special was destined to come. And boy, did it show.
It's interesting to go from talking about Transformers 1, which had one of the most disliked trailers of the year, to going to The Wild Robot, which had one of the most loved, and seeing how much marketing is important in selling you a movie. Because a lot of people were not looking forward to Transformers 1. And then once it finally came out, people were like, wow, that movie was really good.
We can sort of take for granted the power of marketing. For us, I don't think marketing really matters because we're going to see these movies no matter what. But for general audiences, they need a little bit more convincing. And I think the first teaser trailer for The Wild Robot was honestly probably the best first impression that this movie could have given. I showed the trailer to some of my family earlier this afternoon, and even they were hooked by that first trailer.
It provided something that spoke not only to film people but general audience itself, and that's hope, optimism. You saw that and you saw something special. One didn't have to be a regular viewer of cinema to recognize that. Had that trailer not been the grand slam home run that it would have fallen into obscurity. And that fear that people like Chris Stuckman expressed would have come to light, saying the movie would have been released and it would have been forgotten about. That's not the case with this.
So let's finally dig into this. In the movie, we follow a robot named Roz, voiced by Lupita Nyong'o, who is shipwrecked on an island full of animals. And, you know, being a robot in a world, in a environment with no humans to interact with is not the easiest thing to do. She literally had to take multiple days to fully translate and hear what the animals were talking about. And along the way, she ends up having to be the adoptive mother to a goose. We see this ongoing, beautiful story of Roz bonding with nature, realizing outside of her artificial like logic and heart the beauty of the world around her. And this is where I want to say the first Ghibli comparison comes in. The Wild Robot is not, how to explain this? It's a straightforward movie, but it is not paced like a traditional US made movie. It has the structure of something that Miyazaki would have made because all that a lot of this runtime is in there's a lot going on under the surface at every point. It's really just Roz bonding with the goose, Brightbill, voiced by Kit Connor, and the inhabitants around the island, befriending them and becoming one with nature in both a literal and metaphorical way. And then at the very end, it had some conflict to wrap up the overall movie, which that's what caught me by surprise about it. Because when you watch a Ghibli movie, at least one of their more laid back features, you don't really realize how much of a non traditional three structure story this movie is. And I know some people are going to compare it to Wally because some people can't just let a movie be, even though I understand the comparisons, because there's one side of Wally and then there's the other side of Wally. And that's kind of what the Wild Robot is. There are two different sides of this movie.
I kind of had the same thoughts. Like, it's a movie that, like you said, doesn't really have a traditional structure. It is, I think the first half really does a good job of letting the characters sort of discover or letting Roz like discover her like connections with Bright Bill, with Fink, with all of the other inhabitants on this island. It all develops organically. And then towards the second half, we do get a little bit more conflict. But the first half of this movie puts its best foot forward in making you care about everyone on this island and sort of the importance of discovering who you are and what it means to be human, for lack of a better word, and also just working together to greater good.
Absolutely. And when you think back to the trailer and you think of the adapted cover of What a Wonderful World, it made the request for a truce that we would later see in The Wild Robot hit that much harder. When you go back to how the power of movies speak to us, and you think of how my grandma spoke to me when I saw every time I saw that teaser, Running Orders at Sinopolis, and how it helped me think about my relationship with my own mother. It it emphasizes the biggest selling point of what the Wild Robot's all about. That is the emotion through the bond between parent and offspring, specifically mother and son. When I was watching this movie, I couldn't help but think about my own upbringing and growing up on my hometown of Peoria and a place called Pine Tree Road. And then as I grew older, moving from out of Illinois to first it was the suburbs of Houston, Texas. We lived in League City and I went to school in a town called Pearland. Then we moved to Frisco, Texas, then finally San Antonio. And how my mom was alongside the educators every step of the way, how she was once coined as my biggest backer. And it seeing that from the littlest of moments from that seeing seeing the how Roz designed the baby pictures and as the Gosling grew older, it elevated it further because my daddy, God rest his soul, it hit further closer to home because his name was Bill. And my mom coined me a nickname. She said that I was her little Billy. So as I see that, and especially in the final moments when he says to Roz, I love you, mom, that it really tugged on me. And I was an emotional wreck, not only through at various points throughout the entire experience, but throughout the rest of the day. This is the most emotionally wrecked I've been in any movie since seeing a movie at a theater since Toy Story 3 back in 2010. I look back on how the definition of family plays a big role. And when you think back to those three things, and I think back to having my grandma watching over me, a realization that my mom loves me, and seeing the Wild Robot when I did, on that day, the Yankees, which were my daddy's favorite baseball team, he was originally from Yonkers. The Yankees won, were crowned the American League East champions of Major League Baseball. Wholesome. It was the closest I felt to that particular perspective of the definition of family, maybe even in decades. That's the power behind this movie. And I can't help but think if I could say anything to Chris Saunders and Lupita Nyong'o, bless you for bringing such a powerful emotional feels to life.
Man, you're gonna
Well,
make me cry throughout this podcast, aren't you?
Well, you know me all too well, Captain. It's what would you do without me, right?
we should have known that this was going to be the most heartbreaking movie because this is what Chris Sanders is good at. He is very much like Mario Kata in the vein of, and Mamoru Hosoda as well, of familial connection and making these bonds that you don't quite get how powerful they are until a certain moment when they then strike. Because Roz's first arc, if we want to call it that, is very much the journey of becoming a mom. When Roz is first interacting with nature, she is doing a terrible job, even though she's just like, glad to help. Here's a sticker, causing much more destruction to the environment than she realizes. And when she becomes a mom to Bright Bill, she realizes that there's no quick algorithmic solution to what is going on. And when she goes on a discovery to find some robot repair part and she finds another ROS unit, she talks to the ROS unit and the unit itself is, very traditional robotic. Doesn't really have a second thought or a deeper thought than what her programming was giving her. And with one of the best jokes of the movie when Ross just lets it all out saying like, I become a mom. And the Roz unit she's talking to is just like, huh, uh, okay. Nothing in my database will help with that. We see this slow but well paced bit of commentary about how humans, in some way, shape, or form, are trying to interact with nature through science, and seeing how a lot of the times, or at least at the very beginning, because of Roz's recklessness, how destructive it can be. All those stickers did not need to be there, and she was just littering all over the place. And
Cool.
then we dive into the dynamic of Roz, Brightbill, and Fink, this mischievous fox voiced by Pedro Pascal, who at the very first moment tries to eat Brightbill, but then also take advantage of Roz's gullibility, thinking that, he knows what's best for Brightbill. And it's a really interesting character study as we follow these three characters and the others inhabitants of the island that they run into. Like the interaction between Roz and Pinktail, voiced by Catherine O'Hara,
Who is
and
just
all
hilarious in this.
this movie has some extremely funny jokes that have landed way more than most comedies have ever done. The constant amount of animal death in the first few minutes of the movie, like when Roz is talking to the crab, only for the crab to be taken by, I assume, thunderbolts, and just no second thought about, oh, that crab's dead. Oh well, moving on.
All
Or
of the jokes with Pigtail's children and how they're just going on about different ways to either play dead or get eaten for real. Some of the darkest jokes I've seen in a family movie, and they come out of nowhere.
it's not easy being a mother of seven. Ah, six children, only to find out that the seventh child survived because they weren't going to actually do that. But I remember being a little shocked seeing Roz hold a decapitated bird head at one point. I was like, wow, they actually let that shot linger more than a split second. But one of the best interactions comes from Roz talking to Pinktail and saying, I have no idea what I'm doing. And Pinktail is just like, no one does at first. It reminds me of this Seth Meyers joke from his Netflix special, Lobby Baby. And he's just like, you don't really realize when you become a parent until you are. It comes at you out of nowhere. And we see Roz and her journey to become a mom through the thick and thin, through the good times and the tough times of raising Brightbill. And her interactions with nature start to change how the animals see her. Like there's a point where Roz loses her leg. And at a later point, when they're trying to help Brightbill learn how to fly so he can leave with the other geese as they leave to migrate, the beaver paddler, voiced by Matt Berry, which I didn't know he was in this movie. I must have forgotten that his name in the marketing.
I couldn't really pinpoint like who that was until I saw the credits. But yeah, Barry does a great job playing Paddler, who again has some of the like some very clever humor sprinkled throughout his time on screen.
He's hilarious. Like one thing I really like about the voice cast and the cast of characters in this movie, unfortunately, because of how marketing and executive meddling works, a lot of the times they get the cast that they have, not because they are the best role, but because they are sometimes the biggest names out there. And there are a lot of big names in this movie. But what's so different about this, and I do think the casting director, the voice director, and Chris Sanders have a lot of help in this, is it reminds me of how Disney in the 90s cast their movies. Like, there are definitely much bigger names all in one place than the other, like the 90s movies, even though they were still full of big and small or well known names. But the casting felt natural. And the voice performances also had that more naturalistic feeling coming from them. Something about some of the studios in this industry, like Illumination and Dreamworks, they let their actors actually act, because there's always, Chris Sanders has said this in an interview recently with what, Vulture, where there's the common joke of, oh, I'm a celebrity, I'm doing voice work, I can just walk in and with my pajamas on and do a few lines and then I'm out of there. And it becomes this extremely dismissive viewpoint of how good voice acting can be, whether it's from professional voice actors or celebrities. This is one of those cases where the casting, while filled with a lot of big names, is spot on with what characters they play. It's one of those things that I think about anytime I imagine a Disney, like a Beauty and the Beast, or something from earlier Disney, like the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where it just feels cohesive. It's not distracting. Like, this is the same year where we've gotten the Garfield movie, where one of its weakest aspects was the fact that the voice cast was not great. But here, every character and every actor have substance to them. There's purpose to all of the individual characters that play a role in the overarching narrative of watching Roz and Bright Bill and their bond grow. And it's so rare to get that. I felt like that with watching, and I can't believe I'm saying this as an example, the Captain Underpants movie. Big names, you would hardly recognize them if you did not know who they were right out the gate.
hmm I think about Nick Kroll's performance as the villain every time I think about the best examples of celebrity voice casting. And this movie is kind of the reason why I'm not as dogmatic when it comes to animated movies should only hire professional voice actors. Like, yes, I would like to see some of my favorite voice actors land bigger roles in mainstream animated films, but then we wouldn't get the amazing performance that Lupita Nyong'o gives and the very subtle evolution of, at the start of the she is very kind of cold and robotic, just doing the things that she's programmed to do. But as the film progresses, her character arc is sort of reflected in the performance, how her voice gets warmer, more, and the character herself becomes more caring and nurturing. I credit that to both the performance and just really excellent direction.
Like, even Chris Sanders talked about how a lot of work goes into these performances. You're not just in and out in an hour. They went for like multiple hours to get the performances right. It's still acting. You still have to act. You get a lot of amazing and nuanced performances here. Bill Nye as Longneck. I didn't even recognize him until it kind of clicked into my head. That's who it was. And yeah, some of them don't have as many lines as others, like Mark Hamill as Thorn the Bear. But there was never a time where I was like, man, that was distracting. Maybe that character was miscast here. No, good casting all around the board.
When you think about the casting in this movie, I mean, even though it had the block of voices in both trailers for the Wild Robot, similar to how the block of cast was in the announcement teaser for the Da Vinci Code that was attached to Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith back in 2009, which was released a whole year before a shot of the movie was even done. When you even with that and the emphasis of the talent and the performance that these actors are able to do. Mark Hamill, I mean, he was a voice actor to begin with. I mean, he was the Joker for crying out loud in the animated series of Batman. But when you look at what he was able to evolve into the bear, that just showcases the ability one is able to do in that role. And when you think of the robotic and sense of enthusiasm in the sense of programming you were referring to, Mike, it was by the time the character evolves and after Bright Bill goes off with the flock and she sits there in that moment with Fink and she asks him, how do you know if you love something? And through anybody's respective experience in life, that moment comes at the most, there's a sense of warmness in that sense. And the feeling is unlike any other from that specific emotion, emotional standpoint, regardless of the type of love that it is. And to see, and even when Roz awakes and senses that something is wrong with Bright Bill as they fly through the headquarters in that moment, the vocal range and abilities that a performer has to bring to the role, unlike anything a performer has to go through, period. And the first thing, going back to the cast and the names besides the block, when you think of DreamWorks specifically, one could think of something of a big all-star cast of range. It's easy to think of the Shrek movies, but part of the promotion for that was the performers themselves voicing these specific roles. If one didn't know any better and they were to look back on something like The Prince of Egypt, and then they go back and see the A-listers who voiced these biblical characters, and you just sit back and think of, wow, that was the first thing that I thought of with this all-star cast. It's not the promotion specifically. This block of performers were able to bring to their respective roles. That's what made this so unique and special. It's the story itself, not the performers, that speaks to the viewers. And that's why Wild Robot is doing specifically well and overperforming, and rightfully so. Such a relief and refreshing that that's transpiring right now.
Well said.
Like I said earlier, this is what Chris Sanders does. He makes found family style stories. It was like that in Lilo and Stitch. It was like that in How to Train Your Dragon. It was like that somewhat in The Croods. But here, it's at its most focused. As, again, we see how science interacts with nature and how a lot of the times we try to use technology to solve a problem that may or may not exist instead of how can we help protect what we have now in nature. And that's what happens through a lot of this story. It's all about and how destructive we are with how we handle the responsibility of taking care of Mother Nature to make sure that we can still live cooperatively on this planet with it. And it all builds up onto one another. You see how the characters become more like friendly to one another and trust one another. We see the beautiful moment of Roz like helping Bright Bill in his last part of his departure with the flock, leaving. And that was like the moment where everyone started crying in my theater. It was beautiful to see everyone watch such wonderful moments. And seeing how Roz was also able to help bring the other animals together when the snowstorm hits. And how it's like, yeah, we gotta live on this island. It's not going to be great, but we have to help each other out if we want to make it through this. Like it's so easy, but humans keep making it more complicated, or we keep fracturing that relationship with nature as time goes on. It is deeply frustrating.
It is. And I really love the message that this movie conveys that in the scene when they're all lodged in the house that Roz created, that's a big moment for Fink, who is trying his best, going against his nature. And this is where the line from the trailer comes in, going against his nature to get everyone to put aside their differences and work together in order to survive this storm.
What's interesting about how this movie progresses the story, that is, like I said, the Studio Ghibli comparison comes in the form of, like, it's well known if you listen to how Miyazaki crafts his movies. He storyboards them first. He doesn't really come up with a script first until he has it all pinned down with how he wants the movie to look. What would be great for this one scene? How can we make it look like that? Where should we be facing? What should be the focus? All of that stuff. Sometimes that works wonders, but other times it does revel in the fact that sometimes a third act conflict just happen. There's no real build up to it, or the build up is not as well executed as it could have been with their movies. Because here the conflict comes in the form of the company that made Roz invading the island to get the treasure of Roz's memory banks, of how she was able to live peacefully in a non-destructive way with nature. Maybe this is most of it in the books, but because I never read the books, I didn't realize that this took place in a mostly post-apocalyptic future where humans live in these domed off cities like it was the Big O, and nature has taken course in ways of, like, well, the Golden Gate Bridge is completely submerged underwater.
They hinted on that, but it's for adaptation purposes, when seeing even delivering orders in these sold out showings that we had at Sinopolis this weekend, we had we had patrons who were teared up throughout the movie, especially one in particular. I saw an entire family that was teared up specifically as Roz was training Bright Bill to fly. And when some were coming out, they said it wasn't like the book at all. But when you mention that, if had it gone too deep into that post-apocalyptic story arc, I think that would have been a disservice at the end of the day. And it's actually kind of a blessing in disguise that Saunders didn't do that, because in today's climate, especially, I have a fear that it would have been too much of a distraction. And in the end, this adaptation has the potential, well, currently it is the right story at the right time, but in the long term, it really could be the right story at the right time in that respect.
I hope so, because the story in this is one that's pretty profound, and I'm sure this movie will find its audience. It already kind of is, if we're just looking at the box office from this weekend.
Oh, it's doing well. It's
Absolutely. Thank the Lord.
What's interesting to me is I've seen some people, and I wholly disagree with them, say this is where they think the movie kind of fell off when we are introduced to Vontra, the exact opposite of Roz, who is voiced by Stephanie Sue. And she is everything that Roz is not: cold, calculated, only thinking about the short term and long, not really the long term, or thinking about what kind of person Roz is now. She's only thinking as Roz as another product, another robot on the assembly line. That, oh, we have to get you put back together, and to just take the data that has been stored inside her and to take it back for whatever means that we can use for it, to, and like, not in a way to save the environment or anything like that, but more of a means to a profitable end. Because you can tell that Vontra, at least with this group, like with her and the robots that come to take Roz back, are not particularly careful with how they go about the environment. Large, sweeping, and beautifully animated wildfires like burst throughout the whole sequence. They don't care that they're causing this much damage. Roz is fully against what is going on. And we finally also see like all the animals band together, and we get the great payoff of Paddler wanting to take down the biggest tree on the island that ends up helping save everyone, the inhabitants, the nature, the fauna, the plants, the trees, and all that stuff. We see Vontra get defeated. We see the ship ready to leave, only for Roz to realize she needs to go back to the human colony. Because if this one attack was just because of her, she does not want this wonderful world that she has lived in to be destroyed, to be in threat or danger. And listen, I get why people, like some people would say, this part feels tacked on. I understand, but it feels more cohesive than I think people are letting on. Honestly, it comes off like, yes, we can do a lot with technology, but sometimes we just need to let nature be, to let it heal, to let it nurture itself back to strength, and then we'll find some way to help it out later.
I could agree with what you said in disagreeing with the criticism that that ending feels tacked on because if anything, it kind of feels like an answer to what Roz thinks she wants at the start of the movie is to find her purpose, find where she belongs. It takes the events of the entire movie to get her to the answer to that. And as far as everyone else's, this movie does a lot of great setup and payoff, like with Bright Bill preparing to migrate with the rest of the birds, migrating to what eventually becomes the headquarters, and that kind of pays off the relationship with Roz and Bright Bill. And then, like you said, the stuff with Paddler, as funny as it is at the start, he turns out to get like probably one of the most important moments in the film.
And the thing with Paddler, when you look at what he did and how he helped Roz with her lower knee replacement, it's when you look at that and then you see the thing and you think of the things that Roz goes through, and how it was leaking that green, I guess it was like oil or something, oil
Yeah.
or something. And you think, wait, was that, you ask yourself in a moment, like, was that deliberate? And then you realize, no, it was just out of the nature of out of the goodness of his heart. Because your first thought was it maybe it was revenge for stealing his
His
idea from her.
house.
Yeah, his house. But yeah,
I
but
know
oh,
where you live.
exactly. It becomes something much more profound and helping out, and how he's willing to put his ego aside in the name of the common interest.
I mean, like Fink goes through a similar arc, like as
Oh,
Paddler,
absolutely.
where like Fink is very, he's only out for himself, and he'll use whoever can help him get what he wants, whether it's food or shelter. And then when all the animals are stuck inside the giant wooden dome, he starts to take more responsibility of like, hey, we need to work together to make it through this. How, whether we're animals, robots, or humans, we have to help each other to survive.
And that all began with that scene after Bright Bill went off, was he expressed that similar sadness that Bill was gone. And he said, well, I'm gonna go away for the winter now. and you're gonna go back, and because he was starting to get sad to see like the best thing that ever happened to him in that respect is now going away, is now ending, and he's gonna have to wonder, well, what happens now? And to see him come into his own, into that leadership role, is something fascinating in and of itself.
I just disagree that the ending doesn't work. It's such an odd criticism to make because were people just not paying attention to the rest of the movie? Yeah, would it have been sweet if it ended on the would it have been sweet if it ended on like Bright Bill leaving and that was it? Yeah, but that would just leave a lot of empty space. It's not a complete story.
Exactly. And it wouldn't and it while there have been more depressing endings of the sort, it would have been uplifting, but at the same time it would have also ended on such a down note.
And I'm not saying that I don't like a downer ending. I have a lot of movies I'm looking at right now in my collection that have somber ending, but that's not the kind of movie it wanted to be. And
Not
expecting it to be something that you wanted it to be when you had no control in the creative power to do so is childish. Like we got to get over that whole mindset of just because judging a movie by what I wanted it to be compared to what it was actually doing.
The best way to look at a movie like this is you have to meet it on its own terms. And I could see a version of the story ending with Bright Bill leaving with the flock, but I just could tell even in that moment that there's more story to be told. You can't just end it right there.
From that perspective, when you think of stories that could have been constructed in that particular format, there are times when they should have ended in a particular format, but they decided to continue into something further. And not from an animation standpoint, but from a live action adaptation, the first thing that came to mind was when Darren Aronofsky directed Noah, and how the movie could have and should have ended with the ark sailing away, but it decided to go down a deeper path into the after effects of what happened. And while the Bible does showcase that element of Noah becoming a drunkard of wine, it didn't. There was just no reason to go into that subplot of the sort. It could have had such an uplifting ending on its own, but it decided to go down a deeper path. In this case, there was more to the story, and it helped elevate it to something even that much more special. So, yeah, it is. I don't know. I haven't heard or seen anybody make a comparison to, or such a way to say that the movie should have ended with Bright Bill flying away in that respect. But I just don't know how anybody could see that and instead turn it into something much more shorter. And while it still would have had a lasting impact, not as much as it was in what we've got in the final product.
I understand that some people are tired of animated films, at least made in the US, having positive happy endings or endings that don't end on a more realistic manner. I understand, but I'll say this because I watch a lot more animation than I think most animation YouTubers do and most animation fans are ever going to do. Like here's an animated film, I'll say this. You want a dour, depressing, unhappy ending? Go watch Unicorn Wars. It's a great movie. It's a dark movie. It ends on a extremely bitter note. And I'm going to assume all these people who complain about this have never seen this movie. And if they do, they are going to freaking hate the ending to Unicorn Wars. Like, ignore the name and know that it's by the same director as Bird Boy and Afghan Children. But even then, that movie ends on a more optimistic note of life and people can change and there is good in the world. yes, this ends on a more optimistic note of nature healing and the beautiful element of yes, Roz's memory has been taken away, but she will never forget her relationship and bonds with animals like Brightbill. Like, I don't know. I think, and maybe it's just because of like everything going on and what has happened with these past 4 or so years. I want there to be more optimistic cinema. Not that I don't mind or don't want a an unhappy ending. One of the films I saw at Fantastic Fest had a very dark, depressing ending. It was also funny. It was a folk horror dark comedy called Getaway. So look for it when it hits Shutter. But I don't want every movie to be like that. And a dour ending, like there is still a very bittersweet note to this movie. Roz cannot stay on the island, but her connections and bonds that she made will never be forgotten. It's poetic, it's beautiful. So,
It is, and considering that this is the last in-house production at DreamWorks Animation, I kind of read a little bit into the ending and how you could interpret a meta narrative of Roz representing the end of this particular era, but no matter what, we'll still have the memories of what's come before and all of the wonderful achievements that this animation studio has had over the God, I can't believe next month is DreamWorks' 30th anniversary.
uh, again, bittersweet to think about that. This is their last, at least for now, in house production.
We never say never in this business.
No, we don't. But oh gosh, the whole industry needs to be uprooted and replanted with better people in charge. But that's a topic for another time. It is just bittersweet because man, what a note to go out on. Like we haven't even talked about the animation. We've talked more about the story than the actual animation part, and it is so gorgeous. Yes, it's more of the stylized CGI that we're getting now because of all thanks to Spider Verse and or in other movies like 2011's The Painting. Highly recommended. It's such a good movie. The beautiful brush stroke painted art style with everything makes this movie look so good. It is such a beautiful, it's probably the most gorgeous US animated film of the year.
I
Like,
would definitely agree with that. I also think it has the probably the best lighting I've seen in really any movie all year. Just has such like gorgeous colors, even sound design. Just every single frame in this movie, I wouldn't mind hanging up on my wall just to really soak in all of that beauty.
and then it does that point where Fink tells the story to small little Bright Bill, and it goes to have this even more painted look to the animation. It's gorgeous. This is what happens when you give animators time and money to do this. And the animation on the animals is wonderful. I've said this before. I think DreamWorks has some of the best character animators in the business.
Oh yeah,
And
100%.
you get so much emotion from Roz, especially Roz, who has no mouth. Like most of the time when you have a character like this, there's something uncanny and weird and there's this disconnect. And thematically, yeah, there is a disconnect of this uncanny metallic robot or individual traversing nature. But then through Lupita Nyong'o's amazing performance and the wonderful character animation, Roz is one of the great animated robots next to the Iron Giant.
Without a mouth, the emotion showcased through the eyes and the lighting and the lighting of her system in various moments. Those critical moments speak out in and of its own.
She kind of reminds me a little bit of like a mix between Baymax as far as like her facial expressions or lack thereof. And the robots on Lapita from Castle in the Sky, especially with like the way her arms move and the way like her body moves and interacts with the environment around her. They really kind of went the extra mile to breathe life into these characters.
Well, she becomes more connected with nature, and that means being more animalistic in some ways. Like the animation of when she climbs the seaside cliff because of like how she sees a crab doing that, or when she's galloping across the field like the caribou. It was amazing to see that in motion. Like someone said, if she's called the Wild Robots, or if this movie's called the Wild Robots, then she's going to have to start imitating the animals that live there. It makes all the sense. Yeah, I'm sure this happens in the book, but it's such a smart character choice to see how she presents herself as the movie goes on. And there's of course a lot of great character animation in the animals, but it was just amazing how they were able to make Roz so expressive throughout the movie. The animators and the artists did such a good job with how this movie looks. I was not expecting it to look so amazing when I first heard about this movie. Like, I keep forgetting we're at a time where we can make our concept art on the digital screen now. It's amazing. It's no longer we got this cool concept art, but we can't do that. We have to adapt it to motion because otherwise it would take too long and it would be too much of a pain in the neck. Hello, Yoshitaka Amano, and your amazing art. Like it, look at his art if you don't know anything about it, and imagine some animation studio being tasked with making a movie or show that looks like his designs. Woof. But
Yeah.
now we can just like, okay, we want this concept art. This is what we want the film to look like. Okay, done, deal. We got it. It's so cool that we now have the technology and the artists to be able to do this. And when I say technology, I mean like animation tools and rendering software, not generative AI and the slop that comes with it and the Silicon Valley losers that cream their genes over such nonsense.
I'm glad we made that clear because in this household we are very anti-AI.
Well, at the very least, anti-generative, we steal from artists AI, not the because there are some tools that have to use AI to help with things like how Klaus uses and Spider Verse uses a certain type of AI, but the AI is not stealing jack squat. So
Right.
there's a
That's an
difference.
important distinction.
Or in the art of music, when the technology that was used to help elevate the volume of John Lennon's voice in finally being able to, for the Beatles to finally release Now and Then as a single.
I mean, it's a beautiful bond between the natural beauty of art and technology, just like the movie.
Exactly. It has its benefits, but when it's done dangerously, that's when it unleashes a whole new world of problems.
I don't have much else to say. This was just a great movie. It's number two in my animation ranking of the year. It's only because Sirocco is just such an ethereal experience. I mean, honestly, they're tied, but God, because I don't want to bring those type of people in. I am going to be rooting for all the animated films to do well during awards season. But if this is the one that finally gets DreamWorks another Oscar nom, I would not be disappointed by it.
I am rooting for Chris Sanders to to be on that stage come I think March 2nd or whenever Oscar night is. I'm rooting for him to get the recognition that he finally deserves after like 35 plus years in this industry. Chris Sanders is one of the best, and I'm just extremely proud of this movie. I'm happy that all of the animators, the cast, the crew, everyone in between is getting the love that they all deserve for the work that they poured into this artistic cinematic masterpiece.
Not only do Universal Pictures and DreamWorks Animation have an award season campaign on their hands for Best Animated Feature, if they were to play their cards right, they have campaigns for the following categories: Best Picture, Jeff Herman, producer; Best Original Song, Even When I'm Not, DeLacy, Jordan Johnson, Stefan Johnson, Michael Pollack, Maren Morris, Michael Pollack, and Ali Tamposi, songwriters; Best Original Song for Kiss the Sky, DeLacy, Jordan Johnson, Stefan Johnson, Michael Pollack, Maren Morris, Michael Pollack, and Ali Tamposi, songwriters; and Best Adapted Screenplay for Chris Saunders.
I could see that happening. It's been a while since they've done that where they've gone the distance and an animated film was able to break out of its barrier. Funny enough, it's the Oscars are now separating the animation branch as its own thing after bringing it into the folds when it's like you wouldn't have had to have done that if you just let the animation side of the Academy Awards and you just leave them the frick alone. That's literally what the wild robot is. Like a plot point of the wild robots. Technology comes in, does a lot of harm, and there wouldn't have been no harm and destruction if we just left it alone.
Hmm.
It's just so funny how that happened with this movie and how many small tangents we can go on and be like, hey, just like the wild robots. With like all the 100 other movies I've seen, the live action stuff, this would still be in my top five. Maybe number three, number two, I'd have to kind of think about it.
There are a few animated movies that are currently in my top 10 of the year, even a few hybrids of live action and animation. So this is 2024 has been an incredible, profound, and emotional year in the animation department, and we still have a long way to go. I mean, if the preview for the next for the Lord of the Rings animation movie that's going to be coming out and released in IMAX, that's going to be something really incredible. And that type of animation being displayed for a wider audience, it's exciting to see where that's going to go.
I just hope people also are able to see the smaller film that have come out this year, like Chicken for Linda, Sirocco, Memoir of a Snail, and Flow. We still got a Wallace and Gromit movie coming out. We nervously await to see what happens with Moana 2. It'll be interesting to see. I have a more mixed reaction to this year in animation, but the good stuff that has come out has been really good, and The Wild Robot is just another one of those really good animated films. So
I agree with that. And before I saw this movie, my two most anticipated movies of the year were The Wild Robot and Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. But yeah, Flow, Memoir of a Snail, and the Wallace and Gromit sequel, Vengeance Most Foul. Those have a real good shot of, I don't know if they'll reach the same heights as The Wild Robot or Chicken for Linda or Mars Express. If they're even half as good, then 2024 is going to end on a pretty high note for animation. And as of this recording, the Animation Guild is still at the negotiating table with the AMPTP. So once again, I am wishing them the best of luck. I hope they get the deal that they deserve because all of us here stand with animation.
make sure to share your support. And like I said, stop playing those petty console war nonsense with whatever, because I know people are frustrated with Inside Out too, and just like what with what's going on with Pixar. And I am too. It is maddening. But if you want to be fair and you want to be a good animation fan, then you have to come out and remember that DreamWorks essentially screwed over its artists as well. Like this is why they're fighting their rights and their work right now. They want the outsourcing to stop. They want to be treated well. It's not that hard, folks. Just, yeah, support the animators. That's really it for this episode. Don't know what's going to happen next time. We'll probably find like time to do maybe a little Uzumaki and some piece by piece, but we're going to be taking a little bit of a break.
Until next time, Tommy, thank you for joining us for this episode. Where can everyone find you online?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Captain, and thanks for having me back, Cameron. You can follow me on X, aka the website formerly known as Twitter, at T_Hughes35. You can also follow me on YouTube, Instagram, Letterboxd, Snapchat, and Linktree at the T Money 35. Be sure to follow me on my second Instagram dedicated to cooking at Cooking with T Money. Follow movies.mxdwn.com, where you'll be able to see my review of The Wild Robot in full, in addition to other reviews I have written on the website.
All right, Cameron, where can everyone find you?
You can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram at Cam's Eye View. I have my own website called camseyeview.biz where I review animation, like animated films and shows from around the world called The Other Side of Animation. And I have a Patreon at patreon.com/Cam's Eye View. That's where you can find me.
And you guys can find me on various social media sites at Captain K42. You can check out my quick thoughts on letterboxd.com/Coach K42. And you can follow Renegade Pop Culture on Facebook and that place at Renegade at Ren Pop Culture. You can also find us on YouTube, on Podchaser. Consider supporting our Patreon at patreon.com/Renegade Pop Culture. Listen to all of our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And last but not least, everything can be found at renegadepopculture.com. Need an escape? So do we. That'll do it for this episode of Renegade Animation. We will catch you guys later. Peace out.